As we approach the season of gifts, I think it's not uncommon to feel like, while I love giving and receiving presents, maybe this is all a bit much. Maybe there's enough stuff already in our lives, our homes, our world. That's why I'm sorting my scrap bin, which has been gently piling up for like 18 months at this point, because now feels like a good time to do some recycling. Over the next few weeks, I'm hoping to share with you a few easy and quick projects to use up your small pieces of fabric, and hopefully a lot of them will also make nice small gifts. As a sidebar to this, nobody needs to save their fabric scraps. I do because I enjoy doing scrap patchwork and I like how it looks. But this is literally rubbish, and you are under no obligation to keep rubbish in your house. When we talk about all the fabric in landfill, that's an entire industry's worth of waste. Home sewists don't even make up 1% of all that garbage. If you regularly make scrap projects and do patchwork and you keep on top of what you're creating, great, keep your scraps. If you have fabric scraps that are more than 2 years old or that take up more than a full refuse bag, especially if you have limited crafting or storage space, you're not using them. They're just filling up your storage for no reason and stressing you out. You can throw them away. I'm giving you a permit. It's allowed. Anyway. My scraps vary wildly, so I start by sorting them by colour, that's just what works best for me, and then each colour pile is sorted by size. Big pieces get folded and put to one side. I often use these for mock-ups, so my idea of big is based on, could I get half a pattern piece or more onto this? And really tiny pieces immediately go into these storage containers to be used in crazy quilting. This is a Victorian technique based on the look of crazed pottery. The Victorians hand-stitched everything down, but I prefer the modern practice using a sewing machine. I've made a whole video about the technique and an even older video about the coat I made. It's a really fun way of using up small scraps, and it looks really detailed and complex, while actually being fairly quick and easy. Today, though, we're going to be focusing on the middle-sized scraps, which are too small to make mock-ups out of, but big enough to fit one or more cardboard hexagons on, plus seam allowance. It's time to explain English paper piecing. English paper piecing is a form of patchwork that probably dates to the late 17th or early 18th century. The earliest surviving example I could find that was definitely for sure paper pieced, because it still has the templates in, has been dated to 1718, but there's no easily searchable evidence to how much earlier the technique might have been going on for. Fundamentally, you wrap your scraps of fabric around paper shapes, then sew them together along the edges. There's a little more to it than that, but not much. English paper piecing is not the same as foundational paper piecing, incidentally, although helpfully if you search for paper piecing tutorials, you will find both, just labelled as paper piecing. They both use paper and involve patchwork, usually with scraps, and that's about where the similarity ends. I'm cutting these up into roughly the right size and shape, but you can be very sloppy about this. If you really care about neat seam allowances, you can trim after. There's no advantage to being precise at this stage. I was inspired by an 18th century patchwork dressing gown in the V&A which has diamonds. However, I wanted hexagons, because hexagons are the bestigons. I did, however, make my hexagon slightly elongated to look a little bit more like the diamonds, which has the unfortunate side effect that my hexagons are no longer rotationally symmetrical. I can flip them vertically or horizontally, but if I rotate them by 90 degrees, they no longer fit. You don't have to do hexagons or even diamonds. You can do any shape with straight edges that tessellates. Squares, rectangles, triangles. If you're happy using 2 or more shapes, you can add even more polygons into the mix. A bunch of different aperiodic tiling would also work as long as it has straight edges. Curves will work with other patchwork techniques, but not when wrapped around stiff paper. A lot of Penrose tiling patterns would look great like this. A friend of mine made a quilt with pinwheel tiling, but I think he was sensible and used a sewing machine. I think it would work fine with paper piecing though. If you want to try an aperiodic monotile, however, like the hat or the ghost, that has too many internal angles, and you'd have to bend your cards. The monotile patchwork I have seen has all broken them down into smaller polygons, so you don't have to do complicated inset corners. The first step is to cut out about 1 million tiny paper shapes. I found a lightweight cardstock worked best for me. A lot of people use lighter paper, but it probably doesn't want to be too flimsy. Then you baste each piece of fabric around a paper shape. The modern solution to this is to use glue, but I don't know if it's a special glue, and also I'm not going to be washing this afterwards, and I don't like the idea of glue on all these different fabrics. So I just use an old needle that's strong enough to punch through the card, and whatever thread I have lying around. I like to do this in batches, and I've sewn a lot of these by now, so I've got the pattern more or less down. It's only basting, so don't stress about it being neat or regular. You do want the fabric to sit neatly around the card, but if you put too much tension on it, you can bend the card or make it hard to sew, so be firm rather than aggressive. Once you have a lot of these fabric wrap shapes, and I do mean a lot, it's time to start sewing them all together. You can create beautiful patterns by planning out shapes very carefully. I am going for chaos, so I mostly just try and not get 2 of the same fabric next to each other. The basic shape with the hexagons is the rosette, which is 6 hexagons sewn around a central hexagon. If you add a second row, it's a double rosette. Add a third, it's a triple rosette. Right now I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm just stacking up triple rosettes, and at some point I will join them all together. Choose a central hexagon and one of the edge hexagons. Figure out which 2 edges you're joining together and place them upright side by side, right or fabric sides together, and wrong or ugly sides facing out. Then you just whip stitch along that edge. Try not to punch through the card again. There should be just enough play in the fold of the fabric for you to catch the top edges of both shapes in each stitch. When you open them up like a butterfly, the stitches will be almost invisible. Once you've done the first shape, you carry on around the central hexagon, adding all 5 of the remaining shapes. Now you need to sew the edges of the outer hexagons together where they meet, but you can't put them together because the central hexagon is too stiff. Because you have now sewn all the way around the central hexagon, you can undo the basting and remove the paper. It's not needed anymore as there are no more edges to sew. You can reflect on just how long it took you to baste all those shapes and how you are now almost immediately just going to undo them all, but not for too long, as now you can just fold the central hexagon. It's time to sew the outer hexagons together all along the spoke edges. Lots of people choose to use all one kind of fabric or fibre content for patchwork like this, but I'm using anything I've got. It's a bit wobblier than it would be if it was all tightly woven quilting cotton for sure, but I'm very happy with it. The second layer of the rosette is slightly more complicated than the first, but once you know how to do it, you can add as many additional rings as you want. Decide which way round you are going. I'm going counterclockwise this time, and start at a corner where two shapes join. Start adding new hexagons to every edge. I was really inspired by Vincent Briggs' patchwork dressing gown to start working on this. Only I was inspired by the early Instagram posts on the subject, and I didn't realise until the video came out in the summer that he did his patchwork on a machine, because he's a sensible person who makes reasonable choices, and that did derail me for a little bit. But I've already gone too far to back out now, so I'm back onto it. Stay tuned for a making of a dressing gown video in about 2 years or something like that. When you get to the end of the third hexagon, where it's time to move on to the next hexagon of the first row, you'll realise that you need to join the next edge of new hexagon number 3 to the next hexagon of the first row, and you can't easily do that right now. Not a problem, you just need to remove the paper from the first hexagon of the first row to be able to keep going. You'll keep doing this all the way around, removing the papers one at a time as you fill up all the sides of the hexagon. When you get to the final edge of the final hexagon of the first row, you'll be joining it to the first hexagon of the new row. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'd love to see you back for the rest of the seasonal scrap busting videos. Scrapmas? Are we still doing holiday portmanteaus, or is that out of fashion now? Anyway, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to keep the YouTube gods happy, follow me on other platforms to see pictures of my cat, and many thanks to my Ko-fi supporters for putting up with how many upload breaks I've had this year. Ko-fi supporters get early access to all of my videos, the occasional extra sneak peek, and I couldn't do what I do without their help. Thanks for watching, dream big, and I'll see you next time.